I am excited to premiere episode 2 of Polkadot Behind the Code, which discusses how far we've come with the build over the past few years. So with that, I present the premiere of Polkadot Behind the Code, episode 2, The Build.
The other side is the development tool chain.
I was always interested in continuing to build, to create. So I built the company that I want to work in. A company that's focused on helping the world get the best out of blockchain.
Many people here believe that this new wave of technologies can actually help, like bringing a technological backstop to the power accumulation that we're seeing in services like Facebook and Google. And now for the first time, we can use tech to actually address social problems in a much more fundamental way. Like not just applying math to do statistics, but like applying math to help that we don't have to put so much trust in services online.
We have, I think, the best team in the ecosystem. So we don't use other people's technology, we create our own. And much of what we do is, if not strictly research, it's certainly substantial innovation. So we take research grade material and we turn ideas into products.
What I'm trying to do is to make Polkadot work in theory as well as practice. And our job is to make sure that the protocols are actually secure and scalable. So blockchain, it's kind of an adversarial environment. You can have something, you can deploy it, it can work in practice, and then someone can find something which completely breaks it. Then we kind of know that this block could be finalized. So you think of all the possibilities, you come up with one that works, you discuss it with other researchers, we try and poke holes or think of new ideas to improve it. Once we think we've got something good, we'll start talking to developers. And every now and again, us and various people from Parity will have some sort of retreat, and we'll get around to Blackboard and discuss all the open problems in Polkadot.
I was a cryptocurrency hobbyist for a few years. I was pretty big into Bitcoin. I heard some stuff about Ethereum. I was also programming in a language called Rust. So when I saw that there was a company called Parity, which is working on cryptocurrency in Rust, it kind of hit the sweet spot for me. So I packed a suitcase and I haven't really been back much since.
They certify the parachain statements at the private block, but it's not really finality.
But we need the real finality.
We have finality when something exits the fisherman period, or once it's gone through both.
It's been crazy, but it's been great. The team is some really bright people, and I'm learning things about mathematics or about consensus that I never really would have considered before. I think it's pretty good that we're applying it in a way that's not purely academic, that actually seems to be something that can enact change in the world around us.
We want to build decentralized applications that will provide great user experience and functionality. In this new space, we have a lot of things are already being built, so there is a lot of components out there, but they're all very, very disjointed.
So many teams are working in separation, so rather than building on top of each other's technology, they kind of reinvent every time the whole stack from scratch. There has been a lot of focus on just the protocols without thinking how they will be used in the end by the end users.
In order to better coordinate ourselves, we need some sort of framework that will allow us to better see how they fit together.
We built not only Polkadot, the Polkadot blockchain, but we also built a good blockchain framework for creating new blockchains. And in my mind, Substrate was always really key for Polkadot being successful. Polkadot, you might think of it as like a token or a blockchain, but actually What's very important is that Polkadot as an ecosystem has a really good, at least one really good framework for building new blockchains. Because Polkadot's only going to be successful if it's got a lot of successful blockchains working within it.
I joined Parity right about the time of Web3 Summit last year. I hadn't moved to Berlin yet, but I was watching on the computer in California, and I watched Gad's presentation on a rustic vision for Polkadot.
We can construct the runtime. We just basically list all of these modules here.
It was during this talk that he described that Polkadot is his biggest bet against blockchain maximalism towards a vision of a multi-chain future. Substrate provides you with all of the core components you need to build a blockchain. Things like a database, networking, a transaction queue, consensus engine, and even a library of runtime modules.
And the runtime is the thing that actually describes what the transactions do, how the blockchain...
So the runtime, technically speaking, is the state transition function of that blockchain. It means that it defines the rules that are legal, basically, from one block transitioning to the next block. So like how the state can literally transition. But kind of more practically speaking, it's the brains of the blockchain. It's basically a bunch of applications and utilities and things that it knows how to do.
What's so exciting about this platform is that you can go ahead and design your own runtime modules. And we actually envision that this module library might become like a larger app ecosystem, where there'll be developers building all these open source runtime modules. And you as a blockchain developer can just pick and choose the different functionality and logic that you want to add to your blockchain and just put it in there and launch your chain. I'll give you an example here. There's this balances module. Balances module basically describes the functionality of a cryptocurrency on this blockchain. If you want to build a smart contract platform, you would just need to add the contracts module. And so really what I'm trying to tell you is that it's never been easier than today to be able to build a blockchain. With Substrate, you can literally build a blockchain in minutes.
Substrate is powered by WebAssembly in terms of how the logic of the blockchain is encoded. And that's actually how Polkadot's logic of parachains is encoded. So it could serve as a very useful launching off point for parachains to be added to the Polkadot network. And that's huge for us because a lot of parachain developers are specialists in specific fields like machine learning. So providing something like Substrate where they could just get going and start hacking on their machine learning or data science specific expertise was massively helpful.
So what Substrate gives us is this little toolbox. So it doesn't matter if you are the relay chain, like Kusama or Polkadot, or if you are a parachain that's connecting to these relay chains, or if you are your own chain running somewhere on your own. If you want to make changes or add modules or add features, you can go through an upgrade process as long as you get go for governance, which in your case might be council, a technical committee, and a democracy, like we've got on Kusama and Polkadot. Some chains have only got technical committees. Some chains might decide to have a god-like pseudo power, but through these mechanisms, you can actually schedule upgrades.
Polkadot evolved over time as initially an idea of like how to make it scalable and then how to make it easier to develop for developers. A bunch of the principles that Gav laid out in the Polkadot paper, and then basically what we learned along the way, in particular around the governance. The DAO was a pretty decisive moment, like for everybody. Like until then, there always was this tenet of like code is law. First of all, like anything that's written on a blockchain should like never be questioned, and how you deal with controversy in the ecosystem was one of the key things that led us to believe there is a need for governance, because hard fork just means the splitting of communities, and that can't be the answer to controversy. Like you need to bring people together, and this is how you do this, by establishing an explicit way of doing governance.
It's really exciting. Software gets built, features gets added, it gets audited. Somebody in council proposes this upgrade, goes through a council process, goes through a democracy process, and now it sounds like work, but it's actually magic that sits behind it. The fact that you can actually make these changes, and like all of a sudden, all around the world where these nodes are running, from the one block to the next, they're running different versions of the software. It's really cool.
So we're used these days to seamless upgrades when we have an app on our phones, like we just click a button, 3 seconds and it's done. But the user experience of a hard fork is something you can't sell to anyone if they are like reliant on an application. And so also from that perspective, like governance is to us like the answer of how to deal with the problem of software obsolescence and upgrading.
So in Polkadot, we care about bridges. We care about other blockchains, like, say, Ethereum, if we want to sort of communicate between them. And we have the trouble that they have different consensus systems. But because they're both capable of doing logic, what you want to do is say, can we prove to Ethereum that this is what's going on in Polkadot? So Grandpa, it's a finality gadget. It provides a mechanism to get something which is signed by 2/3 of validators, and if we can show that, then we can show that this is the thing that happened on Polkadot. So Grandpa is like a kind of Byzantine agreement thing. To finalize any block, it absolutely has to have 2/3 of people voting for it at some point. One of the things about working in something more the theory end before is I'd prove something and we'd write a paper and it would be amazing, and no one would ever use it. So here I can come up with something new like Grandpa and prove it works, and then within a month Rob Powermeyer came along and started coding it. And now it's in deployment, used by systems in the real world. It's not magic, it's maths and crazy cryptographic assumptions, but it works.
For the specification, we don't care about how databases have to. The context of blockchain is still one that is innovating. We're still very slowly climbing up the ladder of sort of comprehension as to how it's going to affect things and how business and enterprise and indeed the economy of the world will change around it. We can compare it to the days of the computer as the computer progressed through the 80s and the 90s. It was very difficult to keep things compatible from one computer to the next. It means that newcomers to it don't want to invest too much in the current generation because they knew that the next generation is just around the corner and it will massively devalue and undermine any of their investment in the current generation. We don't need to make that trade-off between innovation and adoption. With Polkadot, we can have both, because we can have parachains, these independent blockchains under Polkadot, and if we want to innovate, we can add new independent chains that can still interoperate with the older variants. It means that there's an upgrade path so that when the next generation, the latest and greatest, comes along, there's a way that you can move over to it, there's a way that you can use it. You're not stuck out in the cold on your previous generation.
Really, it's 1969 and we're trying to land on the moon here. There's this huge early technology, very, very difficult. Let's zoom out and look at the big picture. What do you think are the real advantages of decentralization?
We all, I mean, who of you has had their data stolen or leaked at some point?
Totally.
So, I mean, this is really, these issues will become much bigger, and what we hope to build is basically the infrastructure for having a much safer decentral web.
Gavin.
I think this is one of the reasons why Bitcoin actually sort of was a real zeitgeist, in that, you know, people felt, at least the technologically minded ones, but I think increasingly more sort of mainstream people are of the opinion that they don't need to trust the central bank or politicians or systems that are fairly obscure and opaque. They can actually use something that is more or less the same as the cash in their pocket or the notion of gold. That, I think, is part of the whole sort of notion of blockchain and crypto and what it's delivering. Decentralization is sort of a means of delivering it.
So it's going to be an interesting 5 or 10 years.
I'm very excited about what Gav is working on. I've known Gav for a long time, and I think he's just one of the great minds in the space.
If we head to the part of the code base.
We are a diversified investment fund that invests exclusively in blockchain protocols. We manage $200 million, and we have backing from Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia Capital, Union Square Ventures and the Founders Fund, among others.
I think that for the first time, there's enough users broadly in the cryptocurrency space to start making smart contract-based businesses viable. I think we're going to see more and more decentralized corporate structures where capital can be coordinated from all around the world using blockchains. And that whole new kind of financial system is all totally interoperable, permissionless, and extensible.
Once we get to scalable systems that can handle the kind of traffic that you might see on a service like Facebook, then we can start building those user-facing applications and financial services that actually are very useful for the average person.
The reason that I'm so interested in cryptocurrency as an investor is that, to me, a lot of the work here is bootstrapping monetary systems from zero in a totally open source way, where it's opt-in and interoperable and permissionless, so anyone can build anything they'd like. To me, if it plays out the way I think many of us in this room think it will, it's likely to be the greatest investment opportunity humanity will see in this era, definitely in my lifetime.
There are maybe something like 15 million users of, say, Bitcoin. If you start a new blockchain in the pre-Polkadot world, you have to get those users to opt into your new blockchain in order to gain that functionality. In the post-Polkadot world, what will be possible is for that blockchain to immediately tap into that user base of an existing blockchain. This just means that new ideas can scale much, much faster. It almost facilitates a sort of exponential growth curve.
The ecosystem is developing really nicely. We got 250 projects underway, 100 teams building chains and substrate, and about half of those are trying to get a parachain slot. The idea of Polkadot is one that facilitates other projects, other teams, other chains to do as much that they can as possible without Polkadot getting in the way. Operating independently but able to communicate with each other. Celebrating the fact that there are many chains rather than trying to force everything in under one chain and one economy. I think that's probably the most powerful bit of ethos that Polkadot has.
And that was episode 2 of Polkadot Behind the Code. This episode focused on the build, the tech, and the team that has been working so hard to build the protocol and network we are launching parachains on today. Episode 1, which many of you may have seen, featured Gav talking about the idea of Polkadot and where the inspiration for the protocol came from. Episode 3, which is currently in filming, is going to be called The Community, diving into the stories of parachain and tooling developers, builders and businesses, ambassadors and allies across the world. We filmed Polkadot ecosystem teams in over a dozen countries and hope to have that episode in post-production quite soon to share with you all. So today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Simon and Matt from Key Pictures, who have been filming and producing the series with a little help from me and my team at Parity Technologies. Gav actually had the foresight to hire Simon and his team at the start of Polkadot's development, and the footage was really good. He wanted to sort of save it for a personal project in the future, but it was so great that we decided that we really had to take a cut at producing a mini-series for you all to share in this journey. So Simon joining us from the studio in Berlin, welcome, and Matt here in New York. Welcome, gentlemen.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Great to see you. Great to see you all set up in New York.
Yeah, Simon and Matt are actually also helping us produce Decoded today, so appreciate the help from you and your team and Jefe in London. So we've certainly stepped up the production quality this time from my living room, where there was a 720p webcam mounted on a ladder in front of me. Simon, first off, you've known Gav for quite a while, so why don't you tell us a bit about your story there?
Yeah, basically I've known Gav since I was 11, 12 years old. We were kind of really good childhood friends. And yeah, Gavin actually used to act in the films we used to make together. I have some great footage of him as like a 14-year-old programming on his Amiga 500, which one day will be released to the world, hopefully. Yeah, and then basically, so we kept in touch over the years, and then as it turned out in 2017, Gav got in touch with me and was like, "Oh, are you still making films?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's still what I'm doing." And he was like, "Oh," it turned out that we actually were both in Berlin without knowing that we were each living there. So we kind of met up as soon as we could for a beer. And yeah, Gavin told me what he'd been up to, and with Ethereum, first of all, and then with these kind of new plans for Polkadot. And to be honest, I hadn't heard much about blockchain before, so it was a kind of entirely new subject for me. But I could sort of see when I saw Gavin again, it was like, wow, he's still got that kind of childhood kind of curiosity and idealism for creating something. And I was kind of, that made me curious in itself, just kind of seeing Gavin like that again was brilliant, really, to see. And then, yeah, he invited me along to the first Polkadot meetup in Ibiza in 2017. And then I met lots of other people, this great sort of team that Gav had assembled, of often really young guys and young women as well, who were all just enthusiastic about blockchain as he was, and quite idealistic about it, kind of changing things and disrupting existing kind of ways of human interaction and ways of gathering and sharing, I guess, data and knowledge. So from there, it kind of developed into, actually I developed it into a TV series that was about the wider blockchain technology. But over that period from sort of 2017, we kept kind of filming every 6 months specifically with the sort of Polkadot development and project, because it was just such sort of a standout project. And yeah, also because of the personal relationship, I wanted to see how Gav developed. And it's kind of just grown from there.
Yeah, you said the other day that when you were producing this Crypto Kingdom series that you mentioned that Gav was featured in, it was like way before any development work had actually started happening on Polkadot, but it was very clear to you that he had basically built the whole thing in his head already. You've had a bit of a privileged role, right? Like you said, sort of being able to have a bird's eye view and be able to sit down with folks like Rob, young Rob, as we saw in this last episode, and sort of see him grow up alongside the protocol. What's that been like, the experience, like you said, sort of like living this with people, the people building the protocol?
Well, it's been pretty amazing, really, to see those guys develop. And I guess, I think the thing is they were everybody sort of involved has still, from the outset, had pretty strong convictions. So I'd say, like you were saying, it's just, from when I met Gavin. In fact, I interviewed him at one point, and he was like, "Oh, Polkadot's already kind of theoretically proved," and he was already thinking about how it can develop into the next thing. And they're kind of thinking way ahead, but then obviously they've got to do the coding and catch up with it. But then to see the develop from this kind of startup now to a company, and then putting this out there, and then other people building on it, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, I mean, Rob particularly was like, meeting him and that kind of footage of him there in Ibiza, like by the pool, that kind of summed up Ibiza. It was like, I got there, this beautiful villa, amazing weather, and then there's a load of people just sitting on their laptops coding, kind of oblivious to what's around them. And I kind of think that's kind of sums up a bit about the ethos, about what I could see, especially doing that blockchain series. You kind of come across a lot of projects that kind of market themselves really heavily before they even really had much to sort of put out there. Whereas I kind of saw, and I guess Gav was in quite a privileged position with his kind of experience of Ethereum and then kind of having resources to be able to just do this without having to sing about it until it was the right time, really, and now kind of share it with the world. But
very thankful to have all this footage.
Great.
Matt, you've been working pretty hard filming some of the community projects for this episode 3. you've spoken to a lot of people so far. Anything that's really stuck out? And then maybe if you wanted to go into some of the challenges associated with filming in the last couple months to a year.
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of that ethos that Simon was talking about, specifically in Ibiza and Tenerife, that he saw with that early build of Polkadot, really translates to a lot of the companies and people that I've been speaking to for episode 3. It's really about community first and building this ecosystem as a community. And that's been shared across the board. So I've spoken to ChainSafe in Toronto, and I spoke to a community ambassador in Toronto. And I guess also the diversity that's coming up with the ecosystem as well. You're kind of seeing it early days in this idea of a potential for growth and for diversity, and now it's coming to fruition. At the same time, it has been a challenge throughout this entire pandemic. We've started, I think, the first filming that I had was in Berlin with an interview with Gavin, and it was right around the time that the pandemic had just started, so everything had shut down, and we had to kind of just pivot and create this balancing act of this ecosystem is growing, but at the same time, we can't get out there, and it's not as accessible to do so. So it's been a balancing act, and yeah, we've managed to, I think, throughout the past year, just still get out there and talk to a lot of the communities that are growing throughout the world.
Yeah, still waiting on a couple of hard drives to be delivered from a couple of continents. I think we've shot on 4 continents at least thus far, and still waiting on a couple. They're literally in the air right now. So we're hoping to have episode 3 in post-production soon to share with you all in the coming weeks or months. Gentlemen, really appreciate you both being here today and the work that you've done helping us tell the story of Polkadot. It's an incredibly complex protocol, and having resources like this to be able to share with the community and tell the story in a really concise way has been, I think, exceptionally helpful for a lot of people. So appreciate you both for being here today.